Hare Krishna. I would like to welcome all of you all to this 3 days seminar based on the Ramayana. I don't know why Dayalu Ram Prabhu spoke all these things. This is completely a new profile of mine that he has made up. Anyways, since he has introduced me, I'm grateful to him for that. And I am extremely grateful to all of you all for taking out your valuable time and coming here, being with us. Hopefully, staying for the next 3 days with us. When I decided to call these 3 days as Decode the Labyrinth of Life, for the last 1 month, at least more than 100 people have asked me, what is the meaning of the word labyrinth? Some medical students came and said that the word labyrinth means something got to do with the ear, Inside the ear there is the system is known as a labyrinth. They don't know why that is known as a labyrinth, but they think that that is what the labyrinth means. So they felt that probably this is some seminar about ENT or something like that, decoding the labyrinth in the ear. So then I just chose not to say anything till today. So there was a good amount of suspense for many people. Of course, essentially labyrinth means a puzzle that is almost unsolvable, a very complicated network of complicated things. A crystal maze, what some would call. Life is like a labyrinth. Lot of corners, lot of twists, lot of turns, lot of complications. To such an extent that even the simple things of life begin to look complicated after some time. In fact, if something is not complicated, you feel something is wrong. And that's why many people, when they come to the Hare Krishna movement, when we talk about simple things like chanting, dancing, feasting, they feel that something is wrong here because these people seem to be too simple, So, having said all that, let us come back to the Ramayana and try to discuss some aspects from this book. Before I begin, I would like to just tell you what we are going to do for the next 3 days. For sure, we are not going to complete the entire Ramayana. So if somebody has come with an idea that we are going to hear the whole Ramayana in 6 hours, they are sorry. But what we will do is something that will stay in your hearts forever. We will discuss 3 parts of the Ramayana in the next 3 days. Today, we will begin by discussing how the Ramayana came about to exist in the way we understand it, the way we connect with it. And then we will start the initial discussion of the Ramayana, the first aspect of the Ramayana story, from the stories that are related to the pre-birth of Lord Ram till the birth of Lord Ram. I'm not even sure whether we will be able to reach the birth of Lord Ram today, because we already have lost about half an hour. But till wherever we reach. And then tomorrow, we will continue the story till the birth of Lord Ram and many of his pastimes in his childhood. And then tomorrow, also we will discuss one of the very interesting stories of the Ramayana, which is the deliverance of Ahilya. And then the day after tomorrow, we will discuss about the marriage of Sita and Ram. So essentially, this is what we're going to discuss. But don't be too surprised if you see things that are the understanding from these simple stories is so profound that you will say, wow, I never knew this. So all the scriptures are in that way. Superficially, on an upper level, everybody knows the story. Everyone knows Ramayana. But when you go a little deeper, when you dig a little deeper, you realize that I don't know even the ABC of Ramayana. What to speak of knowing the X, Y, Zs. Therefore, we are here to unwind whatever we know and add in a new perspective to understanding and realizing the Ramayana, and more than that, applying the Ramayana in our lives. The traditional Ram Katha doesn't begin without glorifying and offering prayers to the writer of the Ramayana, Valmiki Muni. There is a very beautiful prayer which actually glorifies him in a very poetic and a very nice way. Kujantam Rama Rameti Maduram Maduraksharam Arhuya Kavita Shakam Vande Valmiki Kokilam. Valmikir Munisimhasya Kavita Vanicharinah Shrunvan Ramakatanadam Konayati Parangatim. This verse essentially says that we pay our respects to Valmiki, who is singing the Ramayana like a sweet kokila bird, who is perched on the branch of poetry. And we also pay respects to Valmiki Muni, who is a lion among the sages and who roams around in the woods of poetry. So, the poetry that he has written, the Ramayana, he has written it in such a way that the listeners of the Ramayana, the listeners of the story of the Ramayana, achieve Param Gatim, the highest benefit of going back to the spiritual world. Parvati Devi, she asks Lord Shiva, Keno Payana Laguna Vishnu Nama Sahastrakam Patyate Panditer Nityam Shrota Micham Yaham Prabhu. Lord Shiva says, Parvati Devi is inquisitive to know what is that Lord Shiva chants. What is the name that Lord Shiva recommends to chant? And then Lord Shiva narrates this verse. These two verses are a part of the Vishnu Sahasranam that is so often chanted in South Indian homes. Lord Shiva says, Shri Rama Rama Rameti Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tattulyam Rama Nama Varanane. Essentially, he says that the names of Lord Ram, when chanted, gives perfection to one's life. Having said all that, we will begin the story by reaching to a place where Valmiki Muni is meeting his teacher, whose name is Narada Muni. So, the Ramayana begins like this. It begins with a question. And can you imagine who is asking that question? The writer of the Ramayana is asking the question. Many times, the person who is supposed to be an author, the person who is supposed to be the writer of a book, he is supposed to be an authority in that book. Naturally, people would want an authority to act authoritative. And here is Valmiki acting as if he doesn't know things. So it's a very interesting way to begin a scripture or begin a book, where the author says, I don't know what I'm writing. I don't know who this person I'm writing about. I don't know my protagonist. I don't know my main actors. Now, what would you expect of a person who doesn't know his main character? But that's how the Ramayana begins, with humility. Where the spirit of humility is strong, there is knowledge given. So Valmiki Muni is asking Narada, my dear teacher, my dear Narada Muni, please tell me who is the person who has all the qualities of a perfect man. He starts naming one by one all the qualities. And then, after you know, asking this question, he says, Valmiki Muni says, that my dear sage, don't tell me the name of a person who has even one of these qualities less. Tell me the name of a person who has all these qualities in perfection. And then Narada Muni starts thinking. It's very interesting. Valmiki is asking Narada, who is a perfect hero? All of us also are looking forward to our own heroes through so many ways. And then most of us, we find a hero who inspires us in one way. Somebody may be perfect in sports. Somebody may be perfect in acting. Somebody may be perfect in knowledge. Every person who has one good quality or multiple good qualities has unlimited bad qualities also. So most people settle down to a person who has more than 2-3 good qualities. This is my hero. Why? Because he has 1, 2, 3 good qualities. Valmiki is saying, my dear Narada, I don't want to settle down to anybody even with one imperfection. And Valmiki names 16 qualities which he feels that a hero should have. I'm not going to go into details of the 16 qualities. Just discussing those 16 qualities will take us 3 days. But essentially, these 16 qualities, Valmiki says, if anybody has these in perfection, that person is my hero. And he tells Narada Muni, please tell me who is my hero. So Narada Muni, he starts thinking. Now somebody might wonder, what is he thinking so much? Is he calculating, making like a Google search, who has all 16 qualities, with all kinds of asterisks and plus and so many of these conditions so that nothing is lost? No. Narada Muni, he knows who has all these 16 qualities. But just remembering the person who has these 16 qualities has opened a floodgate in Narada Muni's heart. As soon as Narada Muni remembers the person who has these 16 qualities in perfection, Narada Muni practically loses control over himself. His heart is melting. His bones are melting practically. So Narada Muni takes some time to stabilize himself. Just imagine if just the remembrance of that person can lead to such an effect in Narada's life. What if we actually learn, actually understand, and actually appreciate this person in completeness? What effect it can have in our lives? Then Narada Muni tells, who is the person who is the hero of which Valmiki should worship? Narada Muni tells, that person who has all these qualities in perfection is Lord Ram. And that's how the story begins. Our heart is like a barren field. When there is a barren field, for a crop to grow in that field, a few drizzles won't do. Like in Bombay, little drizzle here, little drizzle there. It's as if rain is making fun of us. So in a barren land, little drizzles won't do. If it rains continuously for 18 days, heavily, continuously for 18 consecutive days, then the barren land has a chance of giving good crop. Bhakti, devotion to God, is like that shower. A little bit here and a little bit there is not going to grow crops, fruits of love of God in our barren hearts. We need a constant shower of good hearing to be able to actually qualify our hearts, to be able to experience even little bit of what Narada Muni is experiencing here. Of course, we do not have the time to do that much. 18 days is a lot, and even 3 days is a lot. So 3 evenings we have to suffice with hearing the qualities of Lord Ram and the associates of Lord Ram, and see if we can experience certain emotions by connecting with these personalities. So Narada Muni, after telling that the hero whom you are looking for, who has all these qualities in completeness, is Lord Ram, then Narada Muni narrates the entire Ramayana to Valmiki in essence. So the book begins by the whole story being narrated in a few pages. So if somebody wants to stop there, they are free to stop there. They know the story in 3 pages of the Ramayana. But the question is that the purpose of the Ramayana? That's not. And therefore, even if you know the essence of the entire Ramayana, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Valmiki, after he hears from Narada, from his teacher, he gets up, Narada Muni leaves. And as Narada Muni is leaving, Valmiki is looking at his spiritual master go away. And as he is seeing the back of his spiritual master, he is feeling great appreciation for the person whom he is following. Then Valmiki Muni, he gets up and he decides to go for a bath. He takes his disciple Bharadvaj Muni along with him. They're just walking on a forest path. Suddenly, Valmiki, he decides, I don't want to go to the Ganga to have my bath today. We will go to the Tamasa river. Then they go to the Tamasa river, which is not very far. The question now is, why did Valmiki Muni change his decision or choose to have bath in a different river today? Now, you might think, sometimes even sadhus need change. That's not a fact. Actually, the quality of a good sadhu is, they are happy doing the same thing every day. Day in and day out. And in fact, change is not so much there in the dictionary at all. They love steadiness. Now, Valmiki, today, why was he inspired to go to another place? Inspiration not always comes by chance. In fact, many things that we are inspired about in our lives, many things that we feel like doing in our lives, can be some divine plan working in our lives. Definitely in Valmiki Muni's life, this particular decision of his, not having bath in the Ganga river, but rather going to the Tamasa river today, was ordained so that something special can happen through his life. So Valmiki, he went to the Tamasa river and he entered one particular section of the Tamasa river. And that particular section was a little dirty, it was a little muddy. He came out of it and he told his disciple that the river should be pure like the mind of a sage, absolutely transparent. And then he got up and he chose to have bath in another section which was a little more clearer. And here, as he was having a bath in the river, he just looked up into the forest and he saw there were 2 birds there. These were known as Crauncha birds. Crauncha birds have a speciality. The speciality of the Crauncha birds is something that now doesn't happen even in human society. Crauncha birds are known for their loyalty. Once a male and female comes together, they never separate till death. And if one of them die, they never again marry. They never again get together with another bird. This is the speciality of the Crauncha bird. And Valmiki saw 2 birds, 2 Crauncha birds, a male and female. that were together on a tree. The forest is a blend of cruelty and beauty. Everywhere you will see beauty, and suddenly in the midst of beauty, you will see something cruel happening. Just when Valmiki was appreciating the beauty of these two birds together, he was not so much appreciating the act of what they were doing, but he was appreciating the principle what they were doing, the principle of loyalty, the principle of dedication. When Valmiki was just appreciating this quality of the Croncha birds, suddenly an arrow whizzed and it shot one of the birds, and the bird fell dead. The other bird was in agony, frustrated at the sudden death of the spouse. Valmiki Muni was in agony. Can you imagine a sage who has nothing to give and take with, family life? More than anything else, he has nothing to give and take with birds, what they're doing. Suddenly, Valmiki Muni erupted in anger. And what he spoke, he couldn't believe that he spoke it. In fact, he uttered a curse. He cursed the hunter who shot that arrow at that bird. Manishat pratishtantam magama shashwati samaha. He said, "O hunter," he was cursing the hunter. He said, "O hunter, whoever you are, because you have separated these two birds from each other, let some inauspiciousness come upon you, not just for some time, for thousands and thousands of years." Now, the hunter was just doing his regular, work. And such things keep happening in the forest all the time. Why did Valmiki get so worked up? As soon as Valmiki narrated this verse, chanted this curse, he started feeling desperately bad. When you hurl negative words at others, it boomerangs and hits you first. So the first person who feels bad by throwing negativity at others is oneself. So Valmiki, as soon as he cursed, he was feeling so bad. Why did I curse the hunter? And then, all the way that he was coming back towards his ashram, constantly, this curse was going on again and again and again. Manishat patishtantam agama shashwati samaha. Ek kroncha mituna tegam avati kama mohitam. Constantly this curse is going on and on. But in the midst of his anger, he also saw something nice. He said, this curse rhymes nicely. This curse actually became a verse. And he loved the sound of the verse. He loved the tune of the verse. Some film songs, once in a while, just get stuck in your mind forever. It is something like that with Valmiki Muni. It just got stuck. He was angry that he cursed, but in spite of being angry, he was happy that he cursed. How can somebody be angry and happy at the same time? So, he became confused. So, he returned back and he started resuming his regular duties of teaching his students. As he was teaching, while he was teaching, and when he was teaching, still in his mind, this curse was going on and on and on, like a tape that is stuck. He couldn't figure out why this is happening to him. Now, if it happens to you and me, it's okay. Something gets stuck and we keep repeating it, and that's our nature, right? But that's not the nature of people like Valmiki. They have strict control over their mind and senses. So, when Valmiki was going through these experiences, suddenly something happened in their ashram. This has never happened before. A flash of lighting, And suddenly something descended from the skies just in front of the ashram. This was the swan carrier of Lord Brahma, carrying Lord Brahma himself. Brahma walked into Valmiki's ashram. These personalities like Brahma, Lord Shiva, Lord Vishnu, they just don't appear just like that. People have to desperately pray for ages for them to appear. And here, Brahmaji just appeared in front of Valmiki. So Valmiki said, "What have I done for you to come, Lord Brahma?" He fell at his feet, worshipped him. And then Brahma told him, "Do you remember that verse that you just chanted?" Valmiki said, "What do you mean by remember? That's the only thing I remember today, you know." And then Brahmaji said, "Can you chant that verse again?" And then Valmiki chanted that verse. And he said, Brahmaji told him that today I put this verse in your mouth through Mother Saraswati. And because I wanted you to recite this particular verse, therefore you cursed this hunter using that verse. And then Valmiki said, "Why did you make me curse the hunter?" And then Brahmaji said, "My dear Valmiki, this verse, from your perspective, it was a curse. But from my perspective, this verse is the first verse of the Ramayana." And then Brahmaji narrated the exact same verse and explained a totally different meaning to Valmiki. And Valmiki was shocked. So, I'm not going to go into details of that. But essentially what Brahmaji explained was that now the meaning of the verse changed totally. Before, the meaning of the verse was that, "O hunter, you separated one bird from another, therefore let inauspiciousness come upon you for thousands of years." And now the verse meant Ma Nishad. So Brahmaji just joined the words differently. Ma, he referred to goddess Lakshmi. So here the verse meant the one who has Lakshmi residing on his chest. Who is that? Lord Ram, Lord Srinivas. Let all auspiciousness come upon you for thousands and thousands of years. So this is a glorification of the Lord by a devotee. So Brahmaji, he told Valmiki that, "My dear sage, I want you to compose the entire Ramayana in this exact same meter in which you composed this particular verse." This meter came to be known as the Anushtup Chandaha. And then Brahmaji, he blessed Valmiki. He told him that whatever you want to understand, whatever you want to experience, whatever you want to know about the intricacies of the Ramayana, whatever emotions you want to understand of the characters of the Ramayana, and every detail that is known and unknown to human beings today will be revealed to you. Brahmaji blessed him with this benediction. And then Brahmaji told him that for as long as the mountains and rivers flourish on the earth, the legend of the Ramayana, Lord Ram's story, will flourish on the earth. And he said, and for as long as the Ramayana flourishes, the world will know and celebrate you along with the Ramayana. This is the blessing that Brahmaji gave Valmiki Muni. A very interesting lesson is that great people have the ability to convert a curse into a blessing. Valmiki Muni was thinking, he could not understand and fathom how such a negative thing as this curse could actually be a blessing. So Brahmaji, so whenever we go through negative experiences in our life, we need people like Brahma. Because on our own, when we analyze the negative situations that go into our life, we only can see negativity in the situations. But when we have people like Lord Brahma who represent good guides, they can help you see positivity in an extremely negative situation. So basically, Brahmaji, he was able to bring out a hidden talent of Valmiki. through this negative situation that came about in Valmiki's life. So Valmiki now, he was prepared to write the Ramayana. Now he was thinking, Brahmaji left, of course. And then, as Valmiki prepared to write the Ramayana, he was thinking, what have I done to deserve to write the Ramayana? He was thinking, why me? Out of thousands and thousands of people that exist in this world, why did Lord Brahma choose me? And as he was thinking about this particular aspect, suddenly in front of him, a very beautiful lady just whizzed by. And then he got his answer. He saw Mother Sita just passing by. Mother Sita was staying in his ashram for many months now. And Valmiki was thinking, now I know why I deserve to write the Ramayana. The only reason is because Lord Ram chose me to host Mother Sita. And because Lord Ram chose me, and because I have the fortune of having the association of Mother Sita and the blessings of Mother Sita, therefore I have the opportunity to do this service also. And then he was thinking, what a great fortune for a person as fallen as me. Every sinner has a future and every saint has a past. Valmiki was thinking about his past. He was thinking, what have I done? What kind of bad qualification I have? In spite of that, Lord Ram is allowing me and Lord Brahma is allowing me to write this book. And that's when he remembered his past life. This life, but many years before, as he began his life, he was born in a family of hunters. His name was Ratnakar. And naturally, he turned out to be one of the best hunters in that area. And he was hunting birds day in and day out. Somehow, probably, that's why he connected with that hunter, which, shot the Krauncha bird. So Valmiki, as he was thinking about his life as Ratnakar, suddenly he remembered the day that his spiritual master came into his life, Valmiki Muni, Narad Muni. And then how Narada helped him to see all the wrong that he is doing through the profession of hunting. Ratnakar justified unlimitedly how he's just doing his profession, nothing wrong, and he's just doing this, the only thing he knows. And of course, Narad Muni explained, he showed up a PowerPoint presentation of what is waiting for him in future, the hellish consequences. And as soon as he saw that three-dimensional PPT, he packed up his profession and he told Narad Muni, tell me what I should do. And Narad Muni told him to chant the names of Lord Ram. Of course, a preacher has to give the message, the same message that is in the scriptures, in a way that is palatable to the person whom he is giving it to. Different shloks for different folks, we say, You can't give the same thing to everybody. So, Narad Muni had that speciality. So he realized when Valmiki was struggling to chant the names of Ram, this man just couldn't chant the names of Ram because he was so sinful that he was not even able to chant the names of Ram properly. So the Narad Muni said, no problem. If you can't chant the names of Ram, can you chant Mara? Mara means death. So he said, of course, that's the only thing I know. So he said, chant Mara Mara continuously, as much as you can. And Ratnakar started chanting Mara, 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 Mara. So Mara, it eventually became Ram. And then Narad Muni went away, allowing him to get purified. And then much later when Narad Muni came back, he saw that in the exact same spot where Ratnakar was sitting previously is a huge anthill now. And that anthill, from inside the anthill, constantly the chanting of Ram's name was coming. Inside the anthill, he was awake and still chanting. We may not be covered by anthill and all, but when we try to chant the holy names of the Lord, we go to sleep. Because the desperation, as much as Valmiki had, is not there. And then Narad Muni, he sprinkled some water, brought him back to his normal condition. Valmiki took shelter of him. And Narad Muni named him, initiated him with the name Valmiki, the one who has come out from a ant hill. So then, as he remembered his past, his gratitude towards his spiritual master just increased unlimitedly. The only way we can remain focused on our spiritual path is if we can remain grateful to the person who brought us into the path. And that gratitude is what is not a temporary gratitude, it's an eternal gratitude, because it's for lifetimes to come. So Narad Muni was very grateful, Valmiki was very grateful to Narad Muni for having initiated him into the process. And then, with prayers to Narada, he began writing the Ramayana. And soon, he wrote the entire Ramayana consisting of 24,000 verses and about 640 chapters, coming to about 6 books. Spiritual knowledge is not researched, it is revealed. So, when we learn physical sciences, what is important is competence. But when we learn spiritual sciences, what is important is character. So how much ever competent you are, if you don't have the right character, you will never understand anything. So Valmiki, he had the right character, and because he had the right character, he attracted blessings. And then after Valmiki wrote the entire Ramayana, he was thinking how to propagate the Ramayana now, how to distribute the Ramayana now to the world. And then he wanted to find students who could handle this literature, understand this literature, not just the words of the literature, but the mood of the literature. Because understanding the words, anybody can. Interpreting the words, misinterpreting the words, anybody can. But understanding the mood, it's not anybody's cup of tea. If you do not understand the mood behind the scripture, but we understand the words in the scripture, we will 100% ruin the scripture. So, Valmiki was trying to search for the right disciples. And that's when Lava and Kush, the sons of Mother Sita, they just happened to come by and greet him. As soon as he heard their voices, he got his answer. Mother Sita passed by, he got his answer. Lava Kush walks by, he got his answer. It almost seems as if Brahmaji walked in, he got his answer. It almost seems as if everything was happening just like that. It was being orchestrated to happen. And then Valmiki trained Lava Kush to the 24,000 verses of the Ramayana thoroughly, to sing them beautifully. And every verse that they would sing, he trained them to sing with the mood of that particular situation, with the mood of the particular character, with the mood of the scene that was going on. And Lava and Kush, when they would sing these verses, they would awaken such emotions in the people that would hear that practically people would laugh, people would cry, people would be rolling on the ground, people would experience all kinds of emotions when they would hear Lava Kush narrating the Ramayana. So, Lava and Kush, empowered by Valmiki, they started traveling around different villages, chanting the verses from the Ramayana, inspiring people. So everywhere they went, the sages, they would just flock around them and hear. It rapt attention. These were just young boys. But grown-up sages, elderly people, they would sit around them and hear them as if they were tiny kids in front of them. And every time they narrated the Ramayana, so many people would give them so many gifts. One sage gave them a kamandalu, one sage gave them a stick, one sage gave them deer skin, so many things. But one sage gave them a special gift that no other sage ever gave. You know what gift it was? It was the gift of a blessing. And you know what the blessing was? He blessed Lava and Kush that the person whom you are singing about will hear your singing. That was the best gift anybody could ever give Lava and Kush. One day, as they were singing, Bharat, the brother of Lord Ram, happened to be passing by. And he heard Lava and Kush singing the Ramayana, and he was inspired by the singing. And he immediately went to Lord Ram and reported the whole thing. And Ram was very eager to hear. He called Lava and Kush to his court. And then Lava and Kush were supposed to perform in front of Lord Ram, sing the Ramayana in front of Lord Ram. By this time, no one knew in the assembly that Lava and Kush were the sons of Lord Ram. So, Ram, when he invited Lava and Kush to recite the Ramayana, it's very interesting how Lord Ram deals with people. Throughout the narration, you will find the dealings of so many people, and the dealings are such fascinating dealings. It teaches us so much. So Ram, he started appreciating Lava and Kush, and he started encouraging them. He started saying that we are eager to hear your beautiful narrations. So, when a person is just about to perform something very challenging, what that person needs, he or she needs encouragement. So, an appreciative audience inspires the performer, and an inspired performer inspires the audience. So Ram, as soon as he saw Lava and Kush, he started appreciating their, great singing abilities, great reciting abilities, great poetry. Lava and Kush were inspired to narrate the story, to sing the Ramayana in front of Ram. And then Ram did something wonderful. He declared to all his citizens, all the courtiers who were present over there, he said, "My dear friends, the narration that these personalities are going to narrate is about great people. Please hear this narration very attentively." So, Ram never said, "This narration is about me." Self-praise is destructive. And here specifically, when Ram is saying that they are going to narrate something about great people, well, who is that great people he's referring to? Specifically, Lord Ram is referring to Mother Sita. According to him, Lava and Kush, what they were singing, is the Ramayana, but the Ramayana is about Mother Sita. Therefore, many acharyas, they say that the word Ramayan is actually supposed to be Rama-ayan. Rama is another name of Mother Sita. But somehow Valmiki is a man, so he didn't want to say Rama-ayan. So he wrote Ramayan, That is on the lighter side. But essentially, Lord Ram considered this book to be Sita-ayan, narration of Mother Sita. And then the narration began. When the narration began, the narration was so fascinating that people were spellbound. People couldn't blink their eyes. They would think 100 times before blinking once. That was the kind of narration that was going on. And in the midst of all that, they were just enjoying themselves so much. When Ram was seeing his citizens enjoy the narration of the Ramayana, Lord Ram, he himself also was enjoying his own story. And Lord Ram decided that just look at the people. Everybody is sitting together so tightly. They are clapping on each other, slapping on each other's backs, and really having fun hearing the Ramayana. What am I doing over here on top alone? Without a company of anybody. So Ram, in the midst of that whole assembly, he held his jewels, he held his dhoti, he held his helmet, and quietly came down without disturbing anyone. And he came down and sat among the courtiers. And he started enjoying the Ramayana. He was clapping on somebody's back, and somebody was clapping on his back. Nobody knew it was Ram. because they were so absorbed in the Ramayana that they had no idea who's where. Ramayana has the power to attract even Lord Ram. So when we hear the glories of Lord Ram through the narration of the Ramayana, it has the power to completely attract our hearts in ways we can never understand. Now we begin what Lava and Kush were narrating to the entire court. This is the story of the Ramayana. So the class begins now. So Lava and Kush, they began the Ramayana by talking about the kingdom of Ayodhya. The kingdom which was called the kingdom which was a miracle. Such a kingdom never existed before, and such a kingdom would never exist later. Ayodhya was in the midst of a province known as the Koshala province. The city of Ayodhya itself, the capital of the whole Koshala kingdom, was a huge, magnanimous city. It was 120 miles long and about 30 miles wide, one city. Millions of palaces within it. Ayodhya, the word Ayodhya means the city that is unconquerable. Nobody can conquer the city. The city cannot be conquered by external enemies, and it cannot be conquered by internal enemies. The external enemies are people who live in other kingdoms. But internal enemies are enemies which are called the 6 vices: lust, anger, envy, pride, illusion. The city was free from both types of enemies. So practically everybody in the city was spotlessly and fearlessly living. The protection system of Ayodhya was fascinating. Outside the city gate, the city had a huge wall. The wall was so huge, it was practically touching the skies. And outside the city, outside the wall, there was a moat. Moat is a watery body around the city. And the moat was so deep, there would be water filled within that moat. And the clouds would mistake that moat to be an ocean. And they would, absorb water from the moat, and they would try to fly over the city walls. But the wall would be so high that the cloud would have to bang on the wall and drop the water back in the moat. This is a description of the city by a poet named Kamba. And then it is explained that the protection system of Ayodhya was so fascinating. Probably even the most sophisticated animation industry today cannot produce a movie with such imagination. The protection system of Ayodhya was so fascinating that the walls of the city were filled with weapons. All kinds of weapons, all kinds of daggers, all kinds of swords, all kinds of bows and arrows. And the wall could detect if any unwanted person is coming in. And the precision was so perfect that if a Garuda would enter who is not wanted, or if a mosquito would enter which is not wanted, both would be shot. Can you imagine such perfection? Even a mosquito, if it is not wanted in the city, cannot enter. That is the kind of perfection in the city. And then it was explained that the protection system was so perfect that it would not just detect enemies who are coming hostile, but even people who came in with evil minds. So if you walked into the city with an evil mind, you're dead. So the city was designed like a board game. It was like a, 8-starred, 8 diagonal board game. And there were thousands of palaces. And each palace would be as white as the moon. Around the city of Ayodhya, in many places, there would be music going on. The king would sponsor music in different parts of Ayodhya. Music is a balm that can calm agitation and inspire innovation. So people would around Ayodhya would be inspired because of the kind of environment that the king had created. And there's another very interesting description which almost seems unbelievable. The city of Ayodhya, though it is so opulent, though it is so amazing, it had two problems or two defects. One defect was that in this city, no shop would sell locks. Can you imagine what a city this is? Lock is something that you get even in our kirana ka dukan, you know. Why would such a established city not sell locks? Because nobody would lock their doors. Even the treasury was always open. So there was no question of needing locks. So therefore there was no locks in that city. And the other defect of Ayodhya was that in Ayodhya, there were no charitable people. Nobody would give charity. That might mean that people are so selfish, they're so greedy, they're only thinking about themselves. But when it comes to Ayodhya, it's something else. It meant that even if they want to give charity to somebody, whom would they give charity to? There were no beggars there. This was Ayodhya. Dasharath, the king of Ayodhya, he overcame the ocean of beggars by charity. Unlimited charity he gave. And practically everybody in Ayodhya had enough. Dasharath crossed the ocean of knowledge by plunging into the scriptures. He delved into the scriptures and studied the scriptures like anything. Dasharath crossed the ocean of enemies using his sword very, very swiftly. And Dasharath crossed the ocean of vices by immersing himself in spiritual practices. These are the 4 strengths of a leader. Now, you will see that we will be giving story and then we'll stop in between and give a lesson like this. So these lessons are going to be in a blue box and with numbers in them so that you understand it's a lesson. You will carry back something. And I'll summarize these lessons much later. So there are 4 strengths of a leader. The physical strength of the leader is his army or his team. The intellectual strength of a leader is by studying the scriptures and by taking good guidance, having a wise counsel. The emotional strength of a leader is by being kind, generous, and sensitive towards weak people. And the spiritual strength of a leader is by taking some time off from worldly pursuits and pursuing one's goal of life and taking refuge in higher powers. So, Dasharath did all these 4 things. The systems of Ayodhya were so perfect that practically the city was flawless. One of the systems that Dasharath erected or constituted was the system of irrigation in Ayodhya. It is explained that there are 2 types of irrigation. It's called water harvesting. One is known as Nadi Matraka and another is known as Daiva Matraka. The Nadi Matraka system means that you harvest water that comes in. Rainwater, river water, you harvest it and use it nicely over a period of time. And Daiva Matraka system of irrigation means that you depend on rain. So, Ayodhya would follow the Nadi Matraka system of irrigation. That means Dasharath created so many facilities for irrigation that practically there was never a shortage of water in the entire kingdom of Ayodhya anytime. One time there was a drought in Ayodhya, no rains. Dasharath and the citizens of Ayodhya realized that there is a drought after 11 years. That means till 11 years there was so much water that they didn't even know that the rains didn't come. Can you imagine the system? Today's world, we follow Daiva Matraka system of irrigation or water harvesting. And therefore, every time there is no rain, somebody commits suicide. Somebody does something, right? It's a sad system. But we can learn from Dasharath what kind of a system he created. After 11 years, when Dasharath realized that there is a drought, there is a shortage of water, he decided to do something about it. He started finding out what's the problem. Why is there no rain coming to our kingdom? That's when he was told that Shani, the planet, is looking at Ayodhya in a certain crooked way. That's the problem. Now, sitting here, what can you do if somebody looks at you crookedly, right? In this world, so many people look at you crookedly. Can you do something about it? You can be concerned, but most of the time you have no ability to do anything about it, right? But Dasharath was not just concerned, he also had the ability to deal with it. That's a good leader. So Dasharath, he decided, if Shani is creating a problem, I will deal with him. The word Dasharath means the one whose chariot can fly in 10 directions. So Dasharath took his chariot and he started flying towards Shani's kingdom. And Shani, he saw a human being in a chariot coming towards his planet. So Shani, he glanced at Dasharath very severely. And you know what happens when Shani glances severely at somebody? The whole chariot started toppling. Dasharath was just falling freely. And as he was falling freely, helplessly, totally, a huge vulture, whose name was Jatayu, appeared in the scene. And Jatayu was such a huge vulture. This vulture was at that point of time at least about 60,000 years old. Quite an old vulture. But it was a huge, mega, gigantic vulture. He spread one wing, and on that wing, he caught both Dasharath and his chariot. And when Dasharath was saved by Jatayu, he was so grateful. He was so, happy that his Jatayu saved him. And then their friendship began. So as soon as Jatayu saved him, Dasharath told Jatayu, take me back to where Shani is. So Jatayu took him back. And when Shani saw him coming back again, he realized that this man is really determined. And he was very impressed with Dasharath. And he decided to change his direction towards another city. Some city which had a less qualified, leader. Dasharath, he became so grateful to Jatayu that he gave him a promise. He said, ask for anything. Whatever you ask, I'll give you. These promises sometimes create problems. Whenever you just give unconditional promises, it creates problems. So, Dasharath, he told Jatayu, ask whatever you want. And Jatayu just asked for one thing. At that point of time, for Dasharath, that one thing didn't matter at all. Jatayu said, if you want to give me something, let your son become my son. So Dasharath said, no problem. He didn't have a son only. If he never had a son, what is the problem in saying, let your son become my son? He had no issue in giving that promise. So, the lesson that we learn from this story is that foresight is the hallmark of a leader. When a leader has foresight, he can develop systems very effectively. But the quality of a good leader is that he just doesn't develop systems, but he makes sure that the system works. There are so many people who can make perfect systems, but when the system doesn't work, they don't know what to do. So Dasharath not only made a perfect system, but he ensured that the perfect system worked perfectly. So Dasharath followed a very interesting type of leadership which is known as servant leadership. Servant leadership is a concept where the leader, he feels that when I'm appointed as a leader, it means I'm given an opportunity to serve more. Most leaders feel that if I'm made a leader, it means I have more people under me, more people serving me, more facilities with me. But leaders like Dasharath, when they're given a greater position of leadership, they feel that I'm getting an opportunity to serve greater number of people. So here, Dasharath, he felt that every opportunity that has come into my life is an opportunity to serve people in a better way. So, Dasharath created a perfect system. But when the system was not working as he anticipated, he considered it to be his responsibility to rectify the system at any cost, even at the cost of his life. Today, most people who are given any position of leadership, they shirk responsibilities. Today, as I was coming out to this program, I happened to contemplate on one particular aspect of leadership. There is a door in our ashram which, you have to push, and as soon as you push the door, it comes back. It shuts on its own. So, I observed that when you push the door, naturally you pull it or push it for you to exit or enter. But once you exit, you don't care for what's happening to the door. You just move ahead. But many times, if you know there is somebody behind you, you might think that it's a good idea to just keep the door a little more open for one more minute. So, how many people actually do that? Most of us don't even have the time to do that. Think about it from this perspective. It's a mindset that says when you keep the door open for somebody else to come through, it's a mindset that says that you are not so much caught up by your own progress that you have no time and regards for somebody else. So most of the times, we're just pushing one door, going ahead, pushing another door, going ahead. We don't care for people who are behind, who may not have the ability to push a door and come out. So as a leader, if one decides to just hold the door open for one more person who is following you to enter, you are creating a new opportunity for somebody. So most leaders go ahead and push barriers. But if a leader is mindful, he will keep the door a little bit open so that not just he enters and the door slams on somebody, but a few more can enter along with him. So, when you help others, it not only makes others feel good, but you also feel good. One time, there was a young man who was running for an interview. This man was late, and he was desperately, wanting to reach on time. So he was driving at a reckless speed, somehow or the other, just trying to maneuver in the right way and somehow get in. He reached the place where his interview was, and, he just had to find a parking slot. And a little ahead, he saw that there was one old man trying to park in one slot. And he knew that that was the only slot available in the whole parking area. He zoomed ahead and he swung the car in such a way that it just parked perfectly. And he turned behind to see the reaction of the old man. That old man was not happy at all. But then he had his job, he had his interview, and he didn't want to miss an opportunity, and he went ahead. The interview was perfect, cleared everything. There was only one round left, where he had to meet the CEO and shake his hand. That's it. And when he went to shake the hand of the CEO, that's when he lost his job. Because the CEO was the same old man. So in life, many times, one tends to push ahead of everybody else, thinking that I have power, I have ability, I have control. But then, when we don't have the kindness to just allow a few more people to enter behind you, you don't have attitude. You may have talent, you may have everything else. So here, Dasharath, he not just had the power to go ahead and undo so many wrongs, but he also had the right attitude to help people who needed it. So, the brothers, Lava and Kush, they're continuing the story. They're talking about a little more about the kingdom of Ayodhya. Ayodhya had a perfect army. The army of Ayodhya was not just a brute force, just people, we are strong and determined. But along with being strong force, they also had years of discipline behind them. Every soldier in the kingdom of Ayodhya, in the army of Ayodhya, was skilled in all kinds of weapons and all kinds of military skills. In fact, Ayodhya was compared to a cave which had countless lions. So each person in that army were practically like lions. And not just they were powerful, but they were also principled. So they never killed anybody who was alone. They never killed anybody who was helpless. And they never killed anybody who was running away, fleeing. The soldiers, they were ready to make any sacrifice for the king, for Dasharath, because they did not fear him, but they loved him. Getting people to work for you using power is very easy. Getting people to work for you using money is much easier. And getting people to work for you using love is the most difficult, because that requires a personal substance. Only when somebody loves you, he will give everything to you. In every other situation, they will hold back something. And generally, the thing that they hold back is the thing that they love the most. The kingdom of Ayodhya, the army of Ayodhya, they never held back anything from Dasharath. They gave him everything because they loved him totally. In the whole book, the whole of Ramayana, you will find many one words, two words, three words that have such profound meaning, but most of the time these one words and two words are all lost to the world. So here is a one word that is generally lost to the understanding of the common world. During the narration, Lava and Kush, they say that Ayodhya, the army of Ayodhya, the soldiers of Ayodhya, they were perfect in sonic archery, but they never practiced it. They just see this and they go ahead. But if we also go ahead, we have lost something really important. Sonic archery means Shabda Bedi, hearing and shooting an arrow. People of Ayodhya loved sonic archery. And in fact, Dasharath was a master in sonic archery. He loved to shoot arrows just by hearing sounds. And in fact, he would go regularly to hunt to be able to practice sonic archery. One day, as Dasharath was practicing sonic archery, he went to a dark part of the forest, and it was a rainy evening. He was hardly able to see anything, but that didn't matter to him because he didn't want to see anything. He only wanted to hear everything. So as he was hearing very attentively, he heard the sound which sounded as if an elephant was drinking water or a tiger was drinking water from a river. As soon as he heard the sound, he shot an arrow. And as soon as he shot the arrow, a huge cry of a human boy came. When Dashrath heard the shriek of a human, his guilt started screaming within him. In fact, more louder than the scream of that boy was a scream of Dashrath's guilt. And he ran towards that boy. The pain of guilt is the toughest pain to deal with. In fact, the pain that that boy was experiencing with that arrow in his heart was nothing compared to the pain that Dashrath was experiencing with agony in his heart. And Dashrath, when he came to where the boy was, he realized that his skill had destroyed this boy. So many times, things that we are proud of, things that we are overconfident of, things that we love to boast about, those very things can be the cause of destruction of so many others. So the boy, he was writhing in pain with the arrow in his chest. He asked Dashrath, please tell me, what mistake did I do? So Dashrath, he started offering an explanation. What really happened? He started talking about how I was hearing a tiger and this and that. The boy, he started explaining his predicament. To justify one's action is the easiest part of life. Very easy to justify one's action. Acting responsibly and being accountable to others is very tough, because we may have to pay for our actions. So that boy, he started explaining his predicament. He said, my dear king, I'm the only son of old, aged and blind parents. They have nobody else in this world except me. And they are totally dependent on me, and I've come over here because they are dying with parched throats. They want some water. And I've come here just to fill a little water and take it back to them. Now who's going to take care of them? That was his predicament. So Dashrath was trying to justify, saying that, no, I didn't shoot purposely. I heard, a tiger or a elephant. He was trying to justify. But just like Dashrath had a reason for what he did, Shravan, this boy, he also had a predicament that he was dealing with. So Dashrath, he realized that as long as one learns to respect the predicament of each individual, till then we will not make mistakes. As long as we only keep justifying our own situation, we are only worsening the mistake that we have already made. Dashrath stopped justifying when he heard that, and he started begging forgiveness from Shravan. This boy told him, remove this arrow because it's causing me immense pain. Dashrath struggled and removed the arrow, and as soon as Dashrath removed the arrow, the boy died. Dashrath, he took water in that same pot to where the old parents were. And as soon as the old parents heard the footsteps of Dashrath coming, they immediately realized that it's not their son. And Dashrath fell at their feet and immediately started begging forgiveness. The parents wanted to know what happened, and he narrated the whole story. And they couldn't handle it. They cursed him. They said, just like we are suffering from the separation of our son, when you are weak and you are most vulnerable, you will die out of separation from your son. They said that, and they jumped into the fire of their son. One begs forgiveness for a mistake that one commits. But it is extremely important to think before committing a mistake. Passion makes reasoning very difficult. So Dashrath's passion for hunting, for sonic archery, it made him totally overconfident. And before shooting that arrow, he did not use reasoning. So he was driven by passion and he did not use his reasoning power. And now that the consequences of his actions are waiting for him, he's asking for forgiveness. And he is resorting to reasoning here. So, if we allow our passion to prevail over our reasoning, then we are in for a curse instead of a blessing. Dasharath came back to his kingdom with a lesson learned. As soon as he reached back, he banned Sonik archery. So from that day onwards in Ayodhya, Sonik archery is never practiced. There are many lessons that we can learn from this particular story. The lesson on how one should see before acting and not act after, see after acting. So we also learned the lesson on dealing with guilt, how the pain of guilt is the most difficult pain to deal with. We also learned that instead of justifying one's own situation, one should learn to see other people's situations also. And then we also learned that the hallmark of a good leader is not that he doesn't commit mistakes. Everybody is going to commit mistakes. But the hallmark of a good leader is if he learns from his mistakes and doesn't commit them again. So, to lament for one's mistake is important, but more important than that is to learn from one's mistake. To make mistake, it doesn't imply a lack of intelligence, but rather it is a lack of foresight. But to repeat a mistake is definitely a lack of intelligence. When we go through phases of, overconfidence in our life, when we go through phases of anger in our life, when we go through phases of passion in our life, we don't realize what we are doing. What Dasharath went through, you may say that's an old story. But don't you think all of us go through such stories? Practically every day we may go through such stories in our life where we are throwing arrows, not physical arrows, but verbal arrows. And when we throw verbal arrows, judgment, denouncing people, speaking harsh words, insulting people, when these arrows fly from our mouth, most of the times when we are shooting these arrows, we are in the height of our passion. We are in the height of our anger. We are in the height of our overconfidence. But only when we realize when the arrow hits its mark, and then there's a cry, that's when we realize, lag gaya usko. And then we start begging forgiveness, we start asking, we start repenting for what we have done. Let me tell you a story to explain this. One time there was a young boy who was very, very prone to getting angry. He would just get angry left, right, center. And without any, proper reason and without realizing the impact that he's creating, his father wanted to help him. So his father, he brought a sack of nails to him and he gave him a hammer. And he told him that every time you get angry on somebody and you say something, go at the back of the farm and hit a nail on the fence. So every time you hit a nail, every time you get angry, you should hit a nail. So the boy said, no problem, that's fine. First day, this boy hit 35 nails. You can imagine the kind of anger that he was boiling with. And every day he continued hitting nails on that fence. After a few days, the number of nails started decreasing because he realized that every time I get angry, I have to go so far and hit a nail, So he started thinking, should I take so much trouble? And then he started working on himself. And over a period of time, the number of nails decreased. And one day, he hit no nail. So he came to his dad and told him, today I didn't hit any nail. His father said, congratulations, wonderful. And the father said, every day that you don't hit a nail, you go out and pull out one nail that you already hit. So this boy, from that day onwards, he started pulling out nails. So very soon, there were no nails on the fence. The son was extremely happy. The father, he was very happy that the nails were removed, but he took the son to the fence and he showed him the fence. He said, "My dear son, the fence will never be the same again. It will have holes in it forever." So basically, when we get angry, the things that we say leave scars on people's hearts. And the relationship is never the same again. No amount of apologizing will help you. So therefore, when we learn from this particular story, we may not shoot arrows, we may not know sonic archery, but we know how to use sonic words. We are shooting words from our mouth, hearing somebody say something to us, or thinking, assuming something that somebody would say to us, and we are shooting arrows. And we also learn from this story how not to be overconfident in our, endeavors. Here is a small video that shows exactly this. It's a very short video, so you have to be really attentive to understand it. But it's also you have to kind of hold your hearts. It's a heavy video also. It's about overconfidence.
On this day, it's the 21-year-old Khan's turn to perform the most dangerous stunt of all, called Sawat D, where the arm is inserted, then quickly pulled from the open mouth, tapping down on the jaw to make the croc snap. Khan pulls a 9-foot Siamese croc, but this is not part of the act. The bone-crushing impact is only one horrifying problem. The angry croc immediately performs his own stunt. A death roll. In the wild, crocodiles use the death spin.
Hare Krishna. This is what it means to be overconfident. So, we'll continue with our Ayodhya. So, Ayodhya was orchestrated in such a way that Dasharath created a perfect leadership model in Ayodhya. So Ayodhya's intellectual power consisted of Brahmanas, people who had perfect control over their senses, people who had strict spiritual discipline, people who, before asking others to do something, they did it themselves. They set examples for others to follow. People who were strict with themselves and accommodative towards others. People, these Brahmanas, didn't beg for survival. They wouldn't go and beg people for survival. But rather, they would accept donations from only grateful students. And that too, before taking a donation, they would verify if the money that they are giving is earned from rightful means. So this was the kind of people that Ayodhya, the Brahmanical power of Ayodhya, and they all commanded respect from people. So Dasharath, he had 8 ministers who were the heart of the model, the leadership model of Ayodhya, of Dasharath. And it's very interesting that these 8 ministers, the name of the minister explained what he does. So it was almost as if these people were chosen to perfection. So this group of ministers is what I call as the big M. M stands for mentors or mantris or ministers. People who give direction to the kingdom. So the success formula of Ayodhya was because Dasharath had 3 types of assets. He had tangible assets. Tangible assets means those things that you can perceive. The tangible assets of Dasharath consisted of his army and his treasury. Along with the tangible assets, he had what is known as the intangible assets. The intangible assets of Dasharath was the confidence that the people had in his leadership. You can't perceive it, but it's an asset to a leader. Just imagine a leader who has perfect confidence of every person whom he is leading. That is the intangible asset of Ayodhya. Along with the tangible asset and the intangible asset, Dasharath had a third type of asset, which is the big M. The big M, this group of people, this group of ministers, they prevented the king from becoming autocratic. The natural tendency in a leader is they want to do what they want. If you compare Dasharath's model with Ravan's model in Lanka, we will see very soon something about Ravan. His model was whatever he said is right. He would have meetings, but in any meeting, if anybody opposes him, that fellow gets killed then and there only. So he lost many ministers like that, and many people got an opportunity to become ministers. And most people who got an opportunity to become ministers in Ravan's kingdom were those whom he had full confidence in that they would say yes always. So, the big M, they prevented Dasharath from becoming autocratic. So therefore, the model of Ayodhya is not a circular system of leadership, where every person in the leadership model are points in the circle, including Dasharath. And the center of the circle is the welfare of the kingdom. So, the 8 ministers, their names and their roles, I'll just narrate to you very briefly, and it's very interesting. The first minister, his name was Drishti, and his role was to give vision to Ayodhya. He was far-sighted, and he was the architect of the Ayodhya's fortune. The second minister, his name was Vijaya. He led the army to victory all the time. The third minister's name was Jayanta. Vijaya led the army to victory all the time. Jayanta ensured that the victory remains by having proper jurisdiction and control. Expansion is important, but not at the cost of continuity. Otherwise, like Alexander the Great, he kept going ahead, everything behind is gone. So Vijaya, he keeps going ahead and ahead, but Jayanta makes sure that what has come remains. And for that, there was another minister whose name was Surashtra or Arthasadhaka. This minister, his role was to make sure that the royal treasury was always full by collecting taxes. But the tax collecting model of Ayodhya was very interesting. The way the taxes would be collected by the ministers was like a honeybee collecting honey from the flowers. If you have seen honeybee collecting honey from the flowers, the honeybee sucks honey from one flower, then goes to the next flower, sucks a little bit from the next flower, goes to the next flower. Have you ever seen a honeybee sucking so much honey from one flower that the flower dies? पूरा चूस के फेंक दो, अगला फूल के पास जाओ. It never happens. The honeybee knows exactly how much to take and go ahead. So citizens, employees, people who work for you, people who serve you, they are like flowers. They offer something valuable. The honey that they have is their skill. The honey that they have is their talent. So if you're like an honeybee, you're supposed to take only as much as needed. Then go ahead, look to the next person for a little more honey. But if you decided to squeeze one flower to such a way that he dies, and then get another one, doesn't work. So Surashtra, he would collect taxes, but sensitively. Another minister, his name was Siddhartha. He was into resource management. So his role was to fulfill the needs of every citizen and the king. So the lesson that we learn here is that classifying needs and wants is the first step towards stability. But the second step towards stability is when you fulfill the needs compulsively and the wants selectively. Parents today, think about it. When children express their wants, do you fulfill their wants compulsively and their needs selectively? Then you are a bad parent. But if you fulfill their needs compulsively and their wants selectively, then you're a good parent. So, Siddhartha, he managed resources in such a way that all the needs of the citizens were taken care perfectly. But their wants were taken care according to the availability of the resource. He fulfilled the needs of the king perfectly, but his wants were taken care according to the availability of the resource. This is Siddhartha's role. And there was another minister. This minister was the most interesting one. Very important in today's times. This minister, his name was Akopa. Akopa means his role was to ensure that no citizen was disgruntled. No disgruntled citizens in the whole kingdom. So he would keep traveling from across the kingdom, and anybody who had a problem, he was available to solve their problems. He had a whole team of people working with him whose only role was to hear people's problems and solve them. The need to be heard, it runs very deep in human beings. This need becomes really pressing when one is discontented. So, when one feels unheard or ignored, one emotionally links this discontent to being neglected and not wanted. Most people are not looking for a solution. Most people are looking to be heard. That's it. Many problems don't have a solution at all, actually. But people, you just sit with them and hear their problem. That is the solution many times. So, here was a kingdom which was equipped to handle every person's problem. At least hear every person's problem. There was another minister whose name was Dharmapal. This minister was a policy maker, followed Dharma perfectly. There was another minister whose name was Sumantra. He was the oldest, the wisest among them, and he was a confidant of Dasharath. And he was the most simple among them. In fact, he was a chariot driver. Can you imagine a kingdom where a chariot driver is made a minister? And the two, he was the chairman of the council of ministers. Can you imagine what kind of trust people had in even a chariot driver? And along with these 8 ministers, there were 2 other sages who were also the part, Vashishta and Vamadev. So, when one has a big dream, any big dream cannot be achieved alone. Dasharath created a team that could handle the biggest dream that he had, Ayodhya. And therefore, even now, the systems that Dasharath made, we still talk about it. The concept of Ramarajya. Now, the story takes a twist. Though Dasharath had everything, he was a complete man, still he had a problem. The complete man had one incompleteness in his life. Can you imagine Dasharath's situation? He had the best kingdom, the best ministers, the greatest amount of wealth, everything perfect in his life. But something was missing. If you take a small coin and cover it over your eyes, you will not be able to see the sun. Because that small coin has not covered the sun, it has covered your eye. Problems in this world are exactly like this small coin. When we go through a problem, or when we have a problem that we think is a huge calamitous problem, it is like placing the coin over our eyes. You can never cover the sun, but you can definitely cover your eyes. So, most people, like Dasharath, have so many amazing things in life, but they have one problem. And that one problem is enough to cover over all the good that they have in their life. And in fact, all the good doesn't seem to be visible at all, because you can see only that coin. Dasharath's problem was, he had everything, but he had no son. Dasharath, it's not that he didn't try. He had so many wives, but still he had no sons. In fact, it is explained that Dasharath had 353 wives. Now you might wonder, 353 किधर से आ गया? 3 मालूम था हमको, ये 350 किधर से आ गए बीच में? Let me explain. The situation at that point of time in Dasharath's life was that Parashuram, who was an incarnation of the Lord, but he was extremely angry towards the Kshatriyas. He was annihilating the Kshatriya race across the world because of a mistake of one of the Kshatriyas. So he was rampantly traveling across the world, annihilating left, right, center. He had 2 conditions when he would not kill a king. One condition was that if the king was surrounded by women, he would not kill that king. Another condition was that if the king was getting married, he would not kill the king. There was a king at that point of time whose name was Nari Kavach. Very interesting name. So whenever he would know that Parashuram is coming, he would immediately surround himself by naked women. Parashuram would get disgusted and he would just move away from there. Dasharath chose the second method. Whenever Parashuram would come, he would get married to one princess. So that's how he got married to 350 princesses. 3 were his prominent queens whom he actually married. But the other 350 were emergency marriages. But he did take care of all the 353 queens nicely. That's the asterisk marks. If somebody can do that, can take care of everyone nicely, then he has rights to marry more. But most people cannot even handle one in today's world. So, anyways, the lesson that we learn is that in everybody's life, there is a but. And that but is so excruciating that you can never think of anything else except that but. Just like if a pin or a small thorn pricks our leg, what is the dimension of the prick? Have you ever measured the dimension of a thorn prick? It's probably so less that you can't even calculate. That's the dimension of the prick, so tiny. Your body is so huge compared to the dimension of that prick. But that one prick is enough to completely damage from top to bottom every cell of your body and fill it with pain. Physical pain is much easier to tolerate than mental pain. Mental pain of not having what you yearn the most. When the mind zooms into a problem, the mind can magnify a small problem to gigantic proportions. So here was Dasharath's situation. One problem, everything else wiped out. Dasharath, because he didn't know what to do, he decided to take guidance from the big M. It's about 9:05 now. Can I go on for another 5 minutes? 5-10 minutes? Is that okay with everyone? Just because we started late, I want to take the liberty of going 5-10 minutes later. But then from tomorrow, we will try our best to start on time dot and end on time dot, provided I am here and y'all are here. So, Dasharath, he did something that he always did when he didn't know what to do. He went to the big M and asked his ministers, what should I do now? I don't have a son, 353 wives, unlimited amount of wealth, unlimited everything. So he asked the ministers whether they suggest him to do an Ashwamedha Yajna, which will eventually help to get a son. All the ministers, they got together and they agreed. They told him, yes, we should do Ashwamedha Yajna. But they warned him also. They said, during the performance of such an yajna, even if there is one lapse on your part, the yajna will completely backfire. But they told him, don't worry, we will help you handle the lapses. We will guard you against the lapses. Mind is a connoisseur of converting small puddles into bottomless oceans. When you come into a bottomless ocean, the only way you can swim across it or handle it is if you have a boat. And good advice is like a boat that can help you cross a bottomless ocean of miseries. So, most people who are, who know things, they know the laws. But nobody knows the bylaws. Why do you think law profession is so great? The lawyers know the laws, but more than that, they know the bylaws. Similarly, when it comes to a yajna like this, seeing the unseen, it requires maturity and wisdom. So, the ministers of Dasharath, they told him that we will guard you against the lapses that you go through. And therefore, Dasharath, he agreed to capitalize on what the ministers are saying. Once the meeting was over, Sumantra, the chief of the ministers, he took Dasharath aside and told him something that Dasharath was shocked by. Sumantra said, my dear king, I knew this is going to happen. He said, many years back, there was a sage whose name was Sanat Kumar. And Sanat Kumar, he had predicted that Dasharath would perform this yajna, this Ashwamedha yajna. And the chief director of this Ashwamedha yajna will be a sage whose name is Rishi Shringa. And if Rishi Shringa does this yajna, then surely Dasharath will be successful and surely he will have sons. Now, when Dasharath heard this, Dasharath was shocked. He said, if you knew this for so many years, why didn't you tell me before only? I mean, it's funny that here Sumantra knew a story which happened many years back, but he didn't speak only. The reason is because Sumantra was a confidant. He was a minister. His job was to improve upon the ideas of the king. His job was not to take initiatives for the king. So, Sumantra, he kept quiet till the king came up with a proposal and he made the proposal better. In life, many times, people always cross their limits, especially because they think they are too smart. In relationships, when you cross limits, then you may think that you're actually helping, but actually what you end up doing is troubling. So here is a very, very subtle lesson on how one should remain within one's, extensions. You extend your hand, you extend your support to the extent you are asked. Don't poke your nose where you are not needed. You will lose your nose. So, Sumantra, he continued telling Dasharath the story of Rishi Shringa. He said, long back, Dasharath had a friend whose name was Romapad. He was another king. The kingdom of Romapad, it went through a drought. Many years of no rain. So the sages of Romapad, they advised Romapad that if a sage named Rishi Shringa comes to our kingdom, immediately there will be rain. Now, Rishi Shringa was not an ordinary sage. He was a very special type of sage. In fact, he was born by the combination of a deer with a Brahmanical personality. It's a very mystical type of story. I'm not going into details of that story. But as a result, Rishi Shringa was a sage, but he had a horn like a deer. So they would always call him as a sage with a horn. Now, Rishishanga was a son of a sage named Vibandaka. So this Vibandaka, he was a very strict father. He wanted to raise up his son to become one of the most super excellent sages in the world. He had a plan for his son. Just like every parent has a plan for their son or daughter. Right from the day they are born, I know parents, they write pilot. My son will become a pilot. My daughter will become a MBBS, MD. So most parents raise their child with a plan. Vibandaka had his own plan. So to make sure that Rishi Shringa never gets affected by any material things, Vibandaka kept Rishi Shringa in an ashram, deep inside the forest. And practically, he could never interact with any other human being except his father. And he kept Rishi Shringa away from the cities, away from the comforts, away from women, away from rich food. So now the question is, how do you get such a Rishi Shringa to the kingdom of Romapad? So Romapad's ministers, they gave an idea. And they sent some female courtesans dressed as sages to the forest. And they found out a time when Vibandaka is not going to be there. And they sent these courtesans exactly at that time. So the female courtesans came to Vibandaka, to Rishi Shringa. Rishi Shringa couldn't understand what is, difference between male and female. He had no idea at all. But somehow, he developed some kind of bonding towards these sages. These sages started talking to him very sweetly. They were offering him, special type of fruits. They were not fruits, they were actually sweets. But he couldn't even differentiate between sweets and fruits, And then they embraced him, and they spoke to him so nice things. And then they suddenly went away. That evening, Vibandaka came back. He never knew what happened. But Rishi Shringa, his mind was totally disturbed. All the time he was thinking, he was emotionally disturbed. He was like a lost man. Sometimes you have college boys and girls who are in love. They go through these experiences. Drinking a glass of water, suddenly in the middle only, freeze, lost in thoughts. So Rishi Shringa showed some of these symptoms. And the father, he didn't understand what happened. The next day when Vibandaka went away, these female courtesans came again. And this time they invited him to their hermitage. So this Rishi Shringa, innocently, he went along with them. So when he reached their hermitage, actually their hermitage was a floating boat. So he was in the hermitage with the sages, with the female courtesans, and the boat started moving. He didn't even realize the boat moved. And they reached the kingdom of Anga, the Romapad's kingdom. And as soon as Rishi Shringa stepped on that kingdom, stepped on the land, huge torrential rain, and the whole kingdom of Anga was absolved from the drought. Of course, from this, we have a very important lesson to learn, how to deal with one's mind. Rishi Shringa is compared to the mind of a living entity. And the women in disguise as ascetics, they are compared to desirable objects. When our mind comes in contact with desirable objects, immediately the mind says, go get it. Ye dil mange more. Just do it. So on and so forth. I'm not so much conversant with the latest. So, when the mind says yes to something, we need the intelligence like Vibandaka, who says no to certain things that are dangerous. So generally, the father of Rishi Shringa, he is like an intelligence. The nature of the mind is to interpret temptations as good. But the nature of the intelligence is to discriminate what is really good and what is really bad. So, when we see in front of the intelligence, in the face of the intelligence, desirable objects, seem to be foolish, seem to be stupid things. But when you are left alone with your mind, that desirable objects becomes, it kind of overpowers you totally. So, if your intelligence is not strong to resist temptations, then we should seek company of somebody whose intelligence is strong to resist temptations. The way monkeys are caught in the forest is very interesting. The hunters, they keep a bottle filled with nuts and fruits, and the bottle neck is such that the hand of the monkey can go in. But if the monkey holds something inside, the hand cannot come out. Only an open hand can go in, but a filled hand, it cannot come out. When the monkey puts his hand in, catches the nuts or the fruits, and he tries to pull it out, but somehow the hand gets stuck. But by that time, the monkey becomes so attached to that nut or fruit, the monkey just doesn't want to let it go. He just remains stuck over there till the hunter comes and easily catches the monkey. So, our mind is like that monkey. You put your hand into something that is a temptation, it gets stuck. The mind says, nahi, chodunga nahi. Kuch bhi ho, chodunga nahi. The intelligence is needed to say, you fool, let it go, otherwise you will die. Vibandaka was not there when Rishishringa took the decision of going along with these people. If only Vibandaka was there, he would have immediately seen through the farce. So, the result of the story also shows that, from another perspective, that even if you are the most strong-willed person in the world, even if you are a person who has never experienced pleasures of the senses ever in the world, but if you are constantly associating with material things, if you are constantly associating with temptations, you will succumb, no matter who you are. Of course, on another level, it also shows that Vibandaka, the father, was trying to force Rishishringa to practice something that he was not natural at. He didn't have a natural inclination towards that. But Vibandaka was saying, nahi, kuch bhi ho, mera beta pilot hi banega. So he wanted Vibandaka to become the greatest sage in the world, the greatest celibate. But Rishishringa was not prepared for that. So basically, one has to practice a lifestyle that is conducive towards one nature. But instead of practicing a lifestyle that is conducive towards one nature, if we practice a lifestyle that is, against our nature, we make mistakes. Of course, when we deal with our mind, one has to be very careful how one behaves. So here, in this story, and in Dasharath's story that we saw before, we saw how if you allow your mind to dwell on one thing, the mind just focuses on that one thing and it makes that one thing such an obsession that you practically forget everything else. I'll end with one story. It's a short story, but it's a very powerful story that you will remember for your life. One time, there was a small boy who didn't want to go to school. He kind of didn't like school. So he decided a trick to, play on his teachers and his staff so that he doesn't have to visit the school. That evening when he came back from school, he went back again to school. But he went back with 3 sheep, lambs. But before he went to the school, he marked the lambs with numbers, big numbers. He marked the first lamb with the number 1. The second one he marked with the number 2. And the third one he marked with the number 4. And he left the lamb into the school. He went home. Next day morning, when the staff came, they saw that all over the ground, all over the school premises, there were all kinds of, dirty stool of the sheep. They were shocked. How did sheep come into our school? Then they started running around and searching, and they found the 3 sheep. They saw that there was 1, there was number 2, and there was number 4. They said, where is the third one? And all of them desperately started searching for the third sheep. They searched every nook and corner of the school, but they couldn't find the third sheep. They declared a holiday to the school because an emergency, third sheep is missing. Big problem. The boy was happy, of course. They were trying to find a third sheep that doesn't exist. All of us in our lives, we are trying to find the number 3 sheep in our life through different things. Dashrath was looking at his son being the number 3 sheep. Vibandaka, he had his own number 3 sheep. Rishishinga, he had his own number 3 sheep. Rompad, he had his own number 3 sheep. Every person in this world feels if the number 3 sheep comes into our life, we'll be happy. We are not happy because we have only 1, 2, and 4. We don't have 3. And the moment we get the 3, we'll be happy. And therefore, we look at other people's lives and try to find what is that thing that is making them happy. And we feel that is the number 3 that we are missing. In fact, even while eating prasad, the other person's plate looks more, nicer than our own plate. It may be the same menu, but somehow or the other, that's how the nature of the mind is. Not satisfied with the 1, 2, and 4 that we have. So therefore, we need to understand that let us take a time and learn to be satisfied with the 1, 2, and 4 that we already have. I'll just summarize whatever we spoke till now. The story, we started by talking about the story of the miracle city of Ayodhya, where Lava and Kush were describing about the 4 kinds of strengths that a leader has: the physical strength, the intellectual strength, the emotional, and the spiritual strength. Then we spoke about the systems of Ayodhya, the Nadi Matraka and Deva Matraka system. And we spoke about how a leader should have foresight. And then we spoke about the costly mistake of Dashrath, the killing of Shravan Kumar. And then we found that the difference between passion and reasoning. So one should have reasoning over one's passions. And we spoke about Dashrath's leadership model. We saw the intangible, tangible, and the big M, the 3 assets. And then we saw the incompleteness of a complete man, the but in everybody's life. And then we saw how whenever Dashrath had a difficulty, he would go and take guidance of the big M. And that is a time, so we need good advice. And then finally we saw the story of the horned man, Rishi Shringa. And we saw how one should learn to mind our own mind. So I'm sorry, I went a little ahead today and a little delayed. But tomorrow we will try to start on time, sharp at 7. And tomorrow is really an exciting day. And I have a lot to speak because I have not even spoken half of what I'm supposed to speak today. So I have today's half and I have tomorrow's whole. So we have a lot to cover. But the excitement is amazing. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.